Well, our first question tonight is around technology. We had a teacher ask about how they can integrate technology to really teach their lessons and make them more interesting and learner-friendly. So thinking about how you're integrating technology into your classroom right now, what do you do to make technology a tool for making the learner more interested and more engaged?
I'll take it. I use technology in a variety of ways in my classroom. One way is through Zearn. That really kind of engages the kids right off from the lesson. And then we do Reflex, which isn't engaged, but it's just another tool to get kids going. We put the exit tickets on Google Classroom, kind of to get everybody up and going.
In my third grade classroom, I also use Zearn, but another thing that I like to do is during small group time, I'll have the students work the application problem and then explain their thinking in Seesaw. So they're actually taking a photo of the application problem, or perhaps I've given it to them in Shobi and they'll take a screenshot. But they're able to explain their thinking and show with their diagrams and also with their words and get feedback from other students and parents.
I use like Nearpods and PowerPoint presentations that I can find for Engage New York and try to dress up the lesson. And then in 6th grade, we use a lot of Notability as well.
I also should mention when teaching whole group that the Embark slides are really helpful. They're free and they're basically like a PowerPoint, and it has everything you need to show with visuals to the students as they're learning.
In first grade, I find that for the problem set, paper and pencil is still best for us. It's a little much to try to work technology into that, but we're using technology and apps like Matholia tools, so we can have our Rec and Rec, we can have counting tools, and that is kind of what jazzes it up for our first graders and keeps them engaged.
Yeah, and we would agree with that at the kindergarten grade level. We think it's important for them to have that paper pencil, that fine motor of actually learning how to write the numbers. We do also use Matholia for like the virtual Rec and Rec and some of the pattern activities.
Okay, next question. So one of the things that I think people are wondering about is the sequence of the content. How would you adjust your lessons when you feel like maybe students have gaps? And maybe those are things that won't come up for a few lessons, or they'll come up in a later module. So the example that this teacher provided was exponents. Her students haven't learned what an exponent is yet, and they're trying to teach exponential notation for moving place value. So just thinking about how you sometimes might adjust what you're doing to maybe gap fill for students, or to try to do some pre-teaching if you know that a concept really isn't going to come up for several lessons, but there's something they need to know right now.
Well, I think in kindergarten we've noticed that everything is pretty much in sequential order, and we haven't really had to put anything in a different set. I will say though, sometimes like we're working on counting up to 10 at the moment, but some of the fluency practice problems, if that's too much for the majority of your class, you can back down and only go to 5 or go to 7 to whatever your class is ready for.
I would agree with that. Knowledge of student and knowing how you need to adapt. And really the biggest thing for this, I think, is looking ahead and knowing what's coming and what would be appropriate to pre-teach or front load with your students.
Yeah, I would totally agree. We just started Module 2, and in Module 1 we had to start converting metric units, and we hadn't even touched metric units yet. So we did a lot of whole group on that portion of the lesson, just really working together. So I've also noticed, because Engage is so new, the vocabulary is a lot different, and the kids aren't used to number bonds or tape diagrams. So just incorporating that throughout the whole day and throughout every lesson has really helped kind of have them keep hearing it, which has helped solidify the concept.
I would agree with that. I think that there might be an assumption that the students have had Engage New York in previous years, and so pre-teaching that vocabulary is important. And I also think that, the first year you're teaching this, maybe teaching it as a whole group is important, just to get the feel for the lessons. But I do still do small group time. And I think it is okay to make decisions based on where your students are. You're still the teacher, and it is a tool. So you want to make sure that, if it's not right for your students at that moment, that whatever the lesson is, that you can stop and pre-teach to give them the knowledge they need to be successful.
And yes, I would agree with the whole group. I, having the advantage with 6th grade, have the daily math that hits a lot of concepts, and we spend about 7 minutes a day doing that whole group to cover a lot of those concepts that maybe they haven't seen yet or they forgot how to do conveniently over the summer.
Okay. So our next question is really about differentiation, and we received a lot of questions regarding differentiation, so I think there's quite a bit that we can provide and share on this topic. But essentially, right now, how are you able to differentiate for your class? I know just within our last question, you all kind of talked about knowing students and knowing where they are and how you're going to provide some of those appropriate scaffolds, maybe some pre-teaching, and I think all of that wraps into that differentiation conversation. And maybe we can even start down with Krista, because Krista, as an instructional coach in the pilot building, you saw a lot of classrooms, K-6, using Engage New York, and so we can maybe start down with Krista, and you can tell us just kind of what you saw too about how people tackled differentiation in math instruction.
So just recently, actually, what I saw in a 3rd grade classroom was they were doing the complements of 10, but it was the double-digit numbers. And this particular teacher said she knew that her students had didn't really even know the basic addition facts to 10. And so while she did the whole group lesson with two-digit numbers, she then pulled during a small group time a group over, and they worked on the complements of 10. So they did the basic fact addition, which was still leading them to that whole group lesson, but gave them the skill at their level.
One of the things I even did today, I was lucky enough to have a volunteer in my classroom during math time, so I strategically put a couple of kiddos with her during the problem set so that they had some extra support with them to help them succeed on that problem set. Also, in kindergarten, we have worked out some math group time, and we've put our 2 classes together and divided them up into 4 different groups, ability groups, between our 2 rooms. So a couple days a week, we're able to spend some time with kids who need some enrichment, but also kids that need some extra support.
I also think, when we think differentiating, we often think about students who need more help, but also differentiating is students who need enrichment. So I think personally that I think it's a lot of the Engage New York is higher level anyway, and I think that partner time, the partner conversations, particularly the debriefing questions, I think those are all really nice opportunities for students to think at that higher level. And then even just communicating, you have to think more about your learning and what you've done to be able to discuss it with someone else.
I will start off by saying that differentiation takes a lot of trial and error, I think, through this, and you have to be okay with failing even and having a rough day as a teacher and pick yourself up the next day and try it again. But I have used a color-coded system that feeds into the must-do, can-do idea. So I've created 3 color groups with students, ability-based, and then I project the problem set through Notability, and then I've color-coded. They must do the problems that are in their color, they can do the ones that are in the other color. And so I sit them on the floor, and then I rotate to the groups and have conferences with them that are appropriate. And with my lower kids, they may only do 1 problem on that problem set, and we're working with whiteboards the rest of the time. And I'm offering them problems that meet them at their level. So color coding works for me.
I do something very similar, just more 4th grade level. I look ahead to the student debrief and see which kind of questions that they're going to have to talk to and converse with their peers, and that's the problems that they have to do within the 10 minutes that it allots for. If they can get those done, they can go on and try to get other problems done, or they can get on Zearn and start their Power Tower or whatever lesson that they're on. We differentiate through multiple ways: small group, student groups, and through Zearn, which really helps my low kids and my high kids kind of get to where they need to be.
I would agree with that, and I also agree with the fact that the problem set itself is really nicely differentiated, because it kind of starts out with some problems that most students should be able to attempt, and then you can select the problems that you think that everyone should try, and then whenever they're able to finish, they can try all of the problems if they're able. But this is our second year of teaching Engage, and I do small groups. I'm doing basically, it's kind of like a daily 5, or the daily 3, but I'm just basically taking apart the lesson so that they're doing the application problem at one time, and they're doing Zearn at one time, and they're doing the problem set at one time, and they're also going to be working with me. And so that way I can kind of give more scaffolding for students who might need that, and then also find a way to help some students take the problems to another level or apply it in a real world way. And there are certain subjects or certain topics I think that the whole group does work better. They all need to see the same thing. And I think even if you are using a small group format, you have to make sure that everyone is exposed to the core teaching. You just know that some of those problems aren't for everyone, because they're really a way for them to extend with their learning.
Sure. Really quickly. I do something similar, which reminded me, but like I do whole group for the fluency portion of it. We do that whole group all the time, and then when we get to the concept development, that's when I split my kids into groups, and we have either 2 or 3 groups, and some are on Zearn, and then I individually, a small group, teach that concept and development, because it is such a high level, and the vocabulary is rich, and the rigor is there. So some of my lower kids really struggle with that, so pulling them one-on-one has really helped differentiate for those kiddos that need that extra attention.
I agree with the problem set getting a little bit harder, and I think we have to realize we don't have to do all of those. Pick and choose which questions those kids do. 6th grade, again, looks different. I have integrated Math 6, which we do almost 2 lessons a day. And a lot of those kids, we do tons of partner work. And when one kid struggles or one group struggles, another group will go over and help and explain. It's a lot of team playing in that group. The other class, is kind of the average to struggling. So I modify a lot for some, and we do a lot more together. And then some of them I say, if you think you can handle this, go take it back to your desk and go. If you want to stay here and work with me, then some of them stay, and then when they feel like they got it, they go back and start working. But I don't assign too much independent work. We do, I would say, 80 to 90% together. And if I think even some of the Engage stuff I think could be too hard, I pull from other resources for those kids that need something on their level.
So I'm kind of thinking, some of you alluded in the conversation about differentiation to how you integrate small groups. And there were some questions from teachers about, what's the best way to structure my time so that I am able to do some small group work. So thinking just about that in general, how does that look in your classroom right now? Whether that might be small groups who are working through a series of rotations, maybe it's just even the ways in which you create small group opportunities for students to get together and have collaborative conversations and work together. But I think it'd be great if everybody, if you had some ideas for just making those small group moments happen during the Engage New York lessons, if that can be shared, I think, with our teachers.
I had mentioned I group the kids in small groups, and I'm rotating. Something I'm planning on incorporating in the next few weeks is having a teacher leader or a student leader in each of those groups. When I can't come, there's an expert there to provide some feedback and really work on training the kids how to be a teacher, not just giving the answer. I think use the resources you have, and we all have lots of kids at our resource, so that's one thing I'm planning on doing to make it run smoothly.
I think personally, I'd like to continue to get to know the curriculum better. We started mid-year, so we started on Module 4 last year. So I feel like at this point next year, I will be even more knowledgeable on it and able to be, hey, I want to do this way, or let's do this way. But for us, our biggest thing is, and we're fortunate, we're a 2-section school. We meet together, we talk about what's happening with all of the students, and then we take those math group opportunities. We have about 30 minutes, and we assess. We use the mid-module and end-module assessments, and then our own assessments to see where they need to be and what we need to be working on. So I hope that we can work out some more small groups, because those are some great ideas. But I think maybe for the people who are brand new using Engage New York, just keep at it for the way it is right now, and then you'll get a feel for it, and you'll get a feel for all of the parts of it, planning it and the actual curriculum itself.
Along with that, just on when we do those groups, we were able to carve out 30 minutes twice a week to accomplish those groups, and some of the things we've had to give up are maybe some of the more cutesy fun projects, just to find the time to get them in, but we felt it was important enough that we needed to meet with those groups.
And I've seen several different ways that teachers have worked in small groups, but the majority of the time I see it's on the spot. It's not a structured small group every day type thing. It's more, here's what I saw in my whole group lesson, so now I'm going to pull to the side this group of kiddos to help with that particular problem. I've also seen where teachers will give a pretest, or actually the exit ticket in the morning, and then that kind of determines how she's going to sort her kiddos for that particular math lesson that day, but then that changes the next day.
Oh, exit ticket first.
Any other comments?
I would just say, I know that with small groups, or really any part of engaged time management can be part of the question. And I've found a way to sometimes take parts of the lesson and move it to another part of my day. Like the fluency, especially in the group counting, we might make a game out of it at our morning meeting time, or we might, be able to count by threes while we're lining up for lunch, or things like that, because, we probably need to be up moving while we're doing that anyway. So trying to, still staying with the script and getting every part in, of course, but also finding ways to take out some of those pieces that can be time consuming, so that I'm mostly focusing on the core lesson at that time, and it helps me kind of carve out a little more time to meet with those ones that need it.
Yeah, I would agree. I've talked to a couple of teachers that actually do the application problem as morning work and the RDW, and so then they come in and do their application problem, and then when they get to that part of the lesson, then they'll just talk about it because they've already had that 6 or 8 minutes to work on it, which I think has been really helpful. I think the biggest thing is looking at your lesson and just finding a piece of it that might work for you to differentiate or to pull in those small groups, to just find maybe the fluency, you're going to try to do some small group stuff, but just trying something I think is the first step, and just figuring out what works with your kids and what works with your schedule and what works with the lesson.
Okay. Well, and I think that conversation brings up the questions around pacing. So, being in our first year of implementation, as I've chatted with other school districts that also use Engage New York, Wichita School District, for instance, they've been using for several years now, and everybody always feels like year one is this kind of bumbly, awkward year, and pacing is a big challenge. And by year 2, they're feeling better, and year 3, they feel great. So having maybe used this now for a little bit longer than in some of our buildings, what suggestions, and it sounds like we already had a couple, but what other suggestions might you offer just around pacing and how to, best use your time, knowing that Engage New York in particular, they ask for that perky pace. So how do you keep things moving when time is limited?
So I know last year, a couple of the pilot schools, there were some teachers that actually set a timer. And they just set the timer for the amount of time it said and stopped when the timer went off. I think it's also important to remember that Engage is not intended to be mastery of that lesson that day. So it's okay to stop and be done for the day and come back tomorrow, because you're going to present it in a different way, in a different context, and that might be better for some students to see it a different way. And then I think another way, I saw a master teacher, a first grade teacher, she actually talked through the entire lesson with me. I cut out this part of the fluency because we had done it yesterday and I saw that they had it, but they didn't have one of the particular activities, so they spent more time on that fluency. They only did a couple of the concept development because, again, she was watching her students and she realized they've got it. So, I mean, I think it's being aware of what your students are showing you so that you know when you can move forward.
I know within the lessons it gives a time frame as to an estimated amount of time. We have found, especially in kindergarten, those are not always realistic or accurate. Some things may say 5 minutes, but it really takes 2. Or something say 4 minutes, but by the time you pass everything out, you've already spent 5 minutes and you haven't even done the activity. So I think just kind of being aware of the pacing they put in may or may not be what will work in your classroom. I know in our classroom last year when we were piloting, we tried to go and power through a full hour and kind of felt like we'd been run over by a train by the time that hour was over. This year, our schedule, it worked out. We do 30 minutes, we go to lunch, and then we come back and we finish up for another 30, 35 minutes. And that has really helped keep our stamina up, help us keep that perky pace, helps the kids have a mental break too throughout it.
I also think having the materials prepared in advance and easily accessible. I'm trying something actually just new this week, and I know it's on, I can't remember the blog. There's a blog that has some really great just organizational things for Engage New York, but I'm doing table tubs. And I just started trying it this week, and so far I really like it, because instead of having to pass out all the different materials, the things I know that we are consistently reusing are right there in their tub. And that's already, I can tell, is saving me some time. But really just having the stuff prepared, knowing what you're going to be doing in advance, I think really helps a lot.
I agree. That's my number one answer, being prepared. And it's not an answer everybody wants to hear, but to be successful, you have to read ahead several lessons. So you know what's coming, you know what you can cut from a day's lesson if you know it's showing up a few days later again. So that's the biggest thing. It takes time to teach the lesson, but it takes a lot more time to be prepared for the lesson. So I think that's half the battle, just knowing that it's going to take some extra time to make it be successful.
I would totally agree with what Chris is saying, as like, you know, you want your kids to get mastery, but that's not really what that lesson's for. So like the kids are ready to be done, and like sometimes you're just ready to be like, we're done with the lesson today. We've hit our max, like we are done. But one thing that I picked up from Lizzie Volin was that she incorporates the problem set into the concept development because those problems align really nicely. So instead of doing problem 1, 2, and 3 of the concept development, she'll plug in like problem set questions. So then they're completing part of that problem set in the concept development to kind of save some time that way, which has been super helpful for my kids. And we're 4th grade, so we have a blank template on Notability for like those place value charts. So it's not passing things out, but I mean, we're an intermediate grade, so we can kind of do some more independent things like that, which has helped quite a bit.
I would agree with the being prepared, but I would just offer that, especially for people who are just in their first year of trying this, that it does get better with the pacing. When you first start, it seems like there's no way I could get all of this done, but it seems to flow more easily after you've done it for a while. Also, I would recommend when you go to the Embark website and that's where you can find the helpful Embark slideshows. There are also videos about the lessons, and there's a gentleman who goes through and explains the lesson and talks about several of the problems that you'll be teaching. And watching those ahead of time, in addition to reading the lesson, really makes me feel like I know what I'm doing and I don't get confused as I'm going through. And it can just flow a lot more easily, and I feel less like I'm reading the script and more like I can explain. If I don't do that, then sometimes I feel like after I've taught the lesson, if I could teach this again, it would be so much better. Even though I had pre-read. So just even starting those videos in the morning, like while you're passing out morning supplies or whatever in your classroom, and just letting it play so that you're getting that little bit of preparation seems really helpful to me.
I would agree, it does get better. 6th grade is a little bit easier because our lesson is only 42 or 44 minutes, and we have a little over an hour block for math. So I can kind of adjust the pacing somewhat, having that advantage that it's not a 60-minute lesson like K-5. So I don't struggle so much with the pacing. When I have to do 2 lessons in a day, I do cut out what I think they know.
So some pre-assessment then to kind of drive what you're going to spend your time on and where you're going to focus. I think that makes a lot of sense. And so there were a lot of questions from teachers just about things related to workflow and, how do you prepare? And I love that, many of you have commented like you feel like it's getting easier now that, you're getting more accustomed to what you're doing. So thinking about how you plan and prepare, are there any other additional tips, maybe even specific to your grade level, things that you can share? Because I think that is kind of a struggle initially as I'm getting used to learning this new series and what's here in this resource. I'm putting in more time probably right now than I'm used to having to put in, having known my previous materials so well. So are there any tips that you might provide for year 1, especially as we're learning the materials on how to maybe reduce some of the time it's taking to prep and get ready?
Well, I would just say you have to read before you get to school, because last semester when we were doing it and we started one, I was like, oh, what? I need like a beaker and I need that. And so I was like scrambling before school trying to get all this. So reading ahead of time and knowing what your kids are going to need and what you're going to need has been such a relief to me when I get into the building being like, oh, I've already pulled this. Or like, I have a math area in my room, like my kids know where the place value charts are. They know where the place value discs are. Like just that go to somebody from your table, go grab 4 things. So like having that readily available, but reading ahead is like a must do.
Yes. I definitely agree with the reading ahead. For my 1st graders, their toolkits are what send me over the edge a little bit when we have, 40 counting cubes out, plus our whiteboards. There's a lot going on. So I think just general organization is a big thing. Last year I used baggies, Ziploc baggies to organize everything, and that was a bit of a nightmare. So I've switched to Tupperware this year. They keep their toolkits in Tupperwares, and that has worked really well. So just general office management and organizing materials goes a long way.
And I will reiterate the don't wait till 3 o'clock on Friday. I personally, I've always started planning for the next week on Wednesdays. And I think with Engage New York, this year I've bumped it back more till I start on Tuesday for the next week. And I don't leave on Friday till everything's ready for the next week. But I think reading over, like I personally go through and highlight specific things that I want to make sure and hit. Even I put notes. I have drawers. We bought these really cute, colorful drawers at Target. But we, those little canvas drawers. And so all my stuff is in there. So I know, and also, and then like I have my lesson files. So a lot of times it'll say, use this template from lesson 17. Well, lesson 17 file is right there, even though I'm in lesson 23. So I can go grab it out if we need it. And then I think that's also makes it accessible for substitutes also, because they're not trying to figure out, I know everything is there, over there. So just that advanced planning, otherwise you will, yeah.
Yes.
Another thing I might add to the advanced planning is don't throw anything away. Because even when you think you're done with it, another 3 to 5 lessons later, it wants you to pull it back out. So save everything and make sure before you send it home or toss it that you really are finished with it.
I think I would just reiterate what everyone else has said, but also I've seen the Tupperware or the shoebox type plastic containers that they keep all of the manipulatives in, and just training the students how to handle those and work with those. And then also the Pocket Pals or sheet protectors for some of the graphic organizers, just staying in that sheet protector so they're always there.
I would just add to utilize your grade level teams. You know, it's a lot easier if you can divide up and, you know, maybe one person does one module or whatever. But if you can kind of divide and conquer, that helps you a lot, especially in making copies and things like that that you might need.
6th grade has the advantage that there is not that much to prep for, but I bought like little scrapbooking tubs, and I have one for each module, and I can keep everything in there, and everything's, you know, I have extra worksheets, I have all the exit tickets, the fluency, so I have it easy to go find when I need it.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit, but we did have several questions from teachers on the incorporation of Zearn. So for those who might not be familiar, Zearn is a tool, K-5, that is aligned with Engage New York and can be a great way to utilize technology. And I know there are a lot of teachers out there. This was a site that was reviewed by our math curriculum team. So it's something that is built into curriculum maps at different grade levels. So I know we do have a lot of people who are exploring Zearn and wanting to incorporate it right now. So if you're currently using that as a supplemental tool with our Engage New York resource, if you can kind of talk to how you're utilizing that, what benefits you might see, or you know, even some challenges with it. But that was a question that we got a couple times, just how do you use Zearn and incorporate that into your instruction?
I use Zearn all the time in my classroom. It's something that we do every day. It's kind of built into our math time. My group or my math time is kind of structured differently almost every day. Sometimes we go over our time, sometimes we're flying through it. But Zearn for us is a great tool for my kids that are struggling with the concept to see it again, to get kind of a second dose. And it's for my high kids get on it first to kind of teach themselves, kind of like, it's kind of like Khan Academy, more student geared. It's more engaging, it's more pleasing to the eye. But it's structured very much like a lesson with the number gym, the Tower of Power, and it paces really nicely with your lessons. So that is kind of supplemental and a reinforcer in all my lessons in Engage, and it's been really great. They can take it home if they have internet access. I have a lot of students, Spanish-speaking students, who will let their parents watch it with them as to kind of explain to them what's going on. So it's an all-around great, I think, supplemental teaching tool for those kids.
I agree, and I also use it. I've used it 2 different ways. When teaching whole group, I used it as morning work, but I always used the previous day's lesson. So they were getting, it was a review, it wasn't that they were seeing it for the first time. They were able to hear it again, as you said, and kind of have that reinforced in case they didn't get it the first time, then the second time, hopefully it's making more sense. And it might be presented with different words when, you know, when they say it, although it is very similar to the lesson. I also, now I use it more in my, like I was saying, daily 3 time. So they are still getting it in the same way, but it's usually like right after I've taught it. So then they're rotating to a station where they're going to be practicing those things in Zearn.
K-5, 6th grade loses out on that one, but any other?
I do not use it.
Okay. All right. Well, then moving on to kind of some other questions. One thing that we had several folks ask is just about how we help those students who are high ability when that enrichment is needed. What sort of things do you like to do to really help provide supports for students who maybe need a little bit extra?
I will admit that I have struggled in this area because of the pacing. It's hard to find some time to get over to those kiddos who need more. I will usually do something very quick. I will tell them to get a whiteboard or find a spot on their problem set to create a problem of their own that someone can solve. They can even pass their paper to someone in their group to have a partner solve the problem they've created. We usually only have a few extra minutes to allow for enrichment, so that's a quick, no prep way that they can extend their thinking.
As I mentioned before, I do think overall the lessons themselves are higher level than what we've done in the past. So I think we're hitting those kids during the core instruction more than maybe we have before. I personally do differentiate my homework that I send it home on Fridays. So I differentiate my homework, so I give those kiddos an opportunity to do some more difficult. And then our math groups, like our high math group, I know like last year, second semester, our high math group, we had met with Jessica and talked about, hey, what are you guys doing in first grade? What do we need to be? They're ready to do more. What are you guys doing, so we can start getting them going on and in the Engage New York way. So I think those are some good ways to and then to have those kids work with those kids that are struggling. It's a great way to help them, both of them.
And just to piggyback off that, when we did go up to the first grade teachers and say, you know, what are you teaching? We were working on 2-digit addition because we had some pretty high kids, but just figuring out how do you teach this and what is the vocabulary you use, so that then they weren't having to relearn it when they were in first grade.
Something that I've seen is giving the pretest of the exit ticket for that morning, and then those students who pass out, I guess, of that lesson, the teacher has then assigned their MAP scores in Khan Academy, and so they get exposed to some content that they might not see in the lesson.
We are pretty fortunate enough. I guess I would start by saying, like, don't be afraid to use people in your building, like whether that's instructional coaches or your innovative specialists. But because our Module 1 in 4th grade was a lot of things that they should be able to do pretty accurately, like multi-digit addition, multi-digit subtraction. So we started out on Module 1 topic D&E and just gave a pretest. And those kids that could get 95% or above on the scoring rubric tested out. And then we talked to our innovative specialists who came up with a rounding kind of like enrichment project. So when we were teaching, it was like just 3 kids out of the whole 4th grade, because we all did it, and they worked on that enrichment packet, or like that enrichment project, to kind of give them a little bit more of rounding, because for some reason that's always hard in 4th grade. So it was like a nice kind of like reinforcer. But we wouldn't have had the time to do that without seeking help from other people in our building. So I would not be afraid to just go to your innovative specialist, your instructional coach, even like your resource teacher, and just say, hey, I have some students that are just rocking and rolling on this. Do you have any resources available that on hand that you could help us out with?
I would agree with the fact that the problems just seem more challenging than we've had in the past. And so I do feel like my students are challenged already, especially because of the read, draw, write part, because they're able to write about the problem and they can give me more maybe than someone who maybe was struggling with that problem. So that's really helpful. And I think that explaining in Seesaw helps a lot too. Sometimes I'll have them write some additional problems that they feel are challenging and then post those in Seesaw so that their peers can solve them, and also so they can, explain and be able to show kind of what their thinking is. I think that's a great way to, basically be able to enrich them while still staying with the same core content.
And I've been using the Khan Academy mappers, putting in their scores and letting them, if they have the time or can pass through that lesson, work on that instead.
we had a question from a teacher that just asked whether or not you would recommend maybe rearranging the modules. So, they're written in a sequential order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe up to 8, depending on your grade level. If a teacher thought that there was something in Module 3 that should come before Module 1, would you recommend that?
Personally, no. I would honestly look at the pacing guide, because I know it, like in 4th grade in particular, it says skip module 4 if you're running out of time, skip module 4 and go to 6 and then 5 and then go back to 4. So they know the whole program in and out. So I would honestly just trust what they're saying. You can kind of see some things come up, but it's written that way for a reason. And like the spiraling, and because every lesson's not taught to mastery, like it's coming back to it. So if you were to rearrange things, I just feel like you're kind of cutting pieces out that shouldn't be cut out. And I think it could really throw off the kids, most importantly, that it's not gonna flow very well for them. So I personally would recommend reading the pacing guide.
Okay. That be true in other grade levels as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, and I think if we're thinking about,
Get the microphone.
I think if we're thinking too about maybe students who are moving throughout the district too, if I would hate to see somebody move from, from our school and we're in module 1, but then they go to kindergarten in another school and they're on 3 and they've missed important components. And I think I keep likening it to when we started Wonders, whatever that was 3 or 4 years ago. And I remember when we got it, I was just like, what is this? It's taking me hours to get ready and I'm never going to get through these. And now, because I've been doing it for 3 or 4 years, it takes no time to plan. I know exactly what I really want to make sure I hit and what I don't necessarily have to hit as hard. And I feel like this is going to end up being exactly the same way. And I do think you need to trust the process. So.
Well, it's gotten better even after 1 semester. Like,
Oh, no question.
even just the 2nd semester of this is just like, can breathe easy a little bit.
I will say in 6th grade last year, we thought it would be better to rearrange the modules, and it was a disaster. So I would stick with how they are written.
Another question that we received was just about place value discs and using place value discs and incorporating them. So if you're at a grade level that does use place value discs, if you want to just give a few comments in terms of how you're using them, how those are incorporated into the lessons.
We use place value discs. They're heavily emphasized in Module 1 as we go over place value. Like I talked about earlier, I have a math area in my room with all my manipulatives that my kids can go to. And my low kids really like them. So when we were subtracting, they used it to fill out their place value chart. So we use them for sure when they're called for in the module, but they're also available to the kids that want them or need them as kind of like some extra support or some reinforcement for them to build that confidence. But we typically just use them when the module says, hey, use place value discs. So it works for us.
We don't use place value discs.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then I would say, we've covered a lot of, I think, the major topics that were asked from teachers throughout the district. But as kind of a last thing to end on, if you could share one tip or one major takeaway that you think is something that you've learned through this process, maybe what would that be? What's the one thing that you would want teachers to know about using this material and maybe even a success or something that you're thinking about moving forward?
I would say it does get easier. It is overwhelming. It's a lot more for me grading and prepping. And I use technology to my advantage with GoFormative and the exit tickets and try to see what GoFormative can grade for me. And I would just do whatever you can to make it easier for you, but just give it some time.
And on that topic, I would say don't feel like you have to grade everything. It's okay to use the problem set to get an idea of what you need to reteach, and maybe take a grade on the exit ticket. Just don't let yourself be overwhelmed, because there are a lot of problems available to us, so we don't want to have to grade all of them. But I think my piece of advice would just be to keep a positive attitude and be excited about it, because it is exciting and it's actually pretty fun. The kids really like it. So if you're displaying that to the kids, they're going to be more successful, and I think other teachers around you will feel better about what they're doing too.
I would just say don't isolate yourself. Every teacher is doing this in the district, so a lot of us have teacher friends in other buildings and in the same grade level as you, so I would say talk to everybody and anybody that you can. If you're struggling with something, talk to your grade level team, talk to your friends at a different building. The best part about, I think, being in Math Cadre and being on this panel is you're exposed to so many different ideas when you sit with a group of people. Like when you're talking about putting something on Seesaw, I'm like, oh man, that's awesome. I should totally do that. So I think just having a dialogue with your colleagues, and not even, doesn't have to be the same grade level, but just get as many ideas and pick and choose what's going to work for you. But you're not in this alone, like everyone's doing it. So seeking those resources, I think, has been a huge help.
I think my biggest advice is to stay positive and stick with it. I agree that the kids pick up on your stress level and the attitude that you're projecting. But my biggest takeaway is sticking with it. I feel like I am teaching math the best I've ever taught in my whole career. And the conversations we're having around math they just give me chills sometimes. So I think stick with it, because awesome things happen.
I really like there's a lot of hands-on components. I think it's really hitting that number sense for kids, maybe more than we have in the past. One thing I forgot, we modified some of our mid-module assessments. So like for module 4, it was going to take, if we used exactly what they said, it was going to take about 12 minutes per student. So we went through with our instructional coach and kind of pulled out what we really thought were the highlights of what they were trying to hit in the module, and created our own assessment. And that was very helpful, and we've done that a little bit so far this year. And then on that, using that data. Don't just give the assessment and file it away somewhere. Look at it, figure out where people are so that you could put them in groups and help them, or reteach. Like we just realized that, gosh, nobody figured out about arrays, and so we're like, we really got to keep doing that some more, and plugging in that some other places. So use those assessments for your teaching.
I would just reiterate, trust the process. I know starting the pilot in January, we started with addition in January. Addition in kindergarten is a really big topic, and I feel like our kids had a much firmer grasp of how addition works, and not just 2 + 2 is 4, but they understood why it was. And I really felt good about how they ended the year on what they knew. So it does get easier. Just keep on trucking through it and trust the process.
I think I would say believe in yourself, because you all are awesome teachers and you know what's best for kids. And so using the materials to do the best thing for the kids, I know you all are doing that. The other piece is just to remember that there is this shift in our mindset, and we all have to kind of make that shift, and understanding the rubric piece of the assessment, that we're on a progression, and all kids are on a progression. It's not about, do they have it 100% right now, but where are they in understanding that piece of the content, and then what do I do to get them to that next step, because there's always a next step.
Well, thank you guys for joining me tonight. I appreciate all the comments, the expertise, everything that you have shared, and I'm going to echo Libby's comments just about keeping the dialogue open. I think really the best way for those of us who are feeling a little stressed out right now or experiencing any anxiety is to reach out to colleagues and work with those instructional coaches. Come and participate in some of our Engage New York workshops. Watch the webinars that we post on the district website in your grade level portals. Continue to have conversations with colleagues, take advantage of those grade level team members who you lean on and rely on, and work with friends in other buildings. Join the district math cadre. because it's a great group of people, and I really appreciate all that they do to help shape math instruction in Shawnee Mission. And just again, I want to thank you so much tonight for your expertise, and we look forward to having more conversations in the future.